He had only done the right thing. That was the thought that kept circling in Jamal's mind, a desperate mantra against the encroaching panic. He had driven his boss home when she was too incapacitated to even remember her own name. He had carried her up 3 flights of stairs to his own small apartment because it was the only safe harbor he could offer. But the next morning, when Elizabeth Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial, woke up in his daughter's bedroom, wearing clothes that were not hers, one phone call could unravel everything he had built. For a black man in America, a single father trying to walk the straightest possible line, there was no room for misunderstanding. The space for grace was a razor's edge, and he was standing right on it. The question wasn't what he had done, it was what she would believe he had done. And that belief, he knew, had the power to either validate his existence or utterly destroy it. The day before the storm broke had been a Saturday, bright and crisp with the promise of autumn. It was a sacred day, reserved for him and Maya. No work emails, no overtime shifts, polishing the endless marble floors of the Sterling Financial Tower. Just the two of them against the world. Their ritual was simple. A walk through Fort Greene Park, a stop at their favorite little cafe for hot chocolate, and then home to prepare for whatever adventure Maya's 9-year-old imagination had cooked up. That morning she was vibrating with excitement, her small hand tight in his. Her school's annual fall production, a whimsical play about a forest of talking animals, was that evening. Maya had a starring role as the wise old owl, a part she had practiced for weeks, her lines echoing through their apartment until Jamal knew them by heart. "Daddy, do you think Mrs. Patterson will remember to record it from the front? You have to see my big speech up close," she said, her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, wide with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Jamal squeezed her hand. "She will, sweet pea. And I'll be right there in the 3rd row, center seat, just like we practiced. I wouldn't miss it for the world." He meant it. Keeping promises to Maya was the bedrock of his life. It was the one thing he could control, the one currency he had in abundance. His love for her was his North Star, the force that guided every decision he made since Angela had been taken from them 3 years ago. The cafe was bustling, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee and pastries. They found a small table near the window. Jamal watched Maya as she carefully unwrapped a crayon from the small roll she carried everywhere. She was always drawing, her world translated into bold, colorful lines on paper napkins, on the back of receipts, on any surface she could find. He saw so much of Angela in her creativity, in the focused way she stuck her tongue out when she was concentrating. The grief, once a raw and gaping wound, had softened into a gentle ache, a constant companion that reminded him of the love that had shaped him. "I'm drawing Mommy as an angel," Maya said without looking up. "She's watching my play tonight from a cloud. She gets the best seat in the whole universe." Jamal's chest tightened. "Yeah, baby girl, she does." He reached across the table and tucked a stray braid behind her ear. He lived for these moments of innocent wisdom, the way she kept her mother's spirit alive in the most natural, beautiful way. Angela would have loved this, loved the fierce, bright light that was their daughter. It was in that warm, safe bubble that the first crack appeared. A woman with a voice like shattering ice cut through the cafe's gentle hum. "Excuse me, can you get your child under control?" Jamal turned. A woman in an impeccably tailored pantsuit stood over a nearby table, her face a mask of cold fury. A dark splash of hot chocolate stained the sleeve of her cream-colored blazer. Maya had been so absorbed in her drawing that she'd knocked her cup as she reached for a different crayon. It had happened in a split second. "Oh, I am so sorry," Jamal said, immediately standing up, his hands already reaching for napkins. His entire posture shifted, a conditioned response honed by years of navigating a world that was quick to judge. He made himself smaller, his voice softer, his movements careful and non-threatening. It was a complete accident. Let me help you with that. I can pay for the dry cleaning, of course. The woman looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his worn jeans and simple hoodie. It was a look he knew well, a swift and brutal calculation of his worth. He felt the familiar heat of shame and anger rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down. For Maya. He had to be calm for Maya. "Don't touch it," she snapped, pulling her arm away as if he were contaminated. "This is $1,000 blazer. What are you going to do? Scrub it with a napkin?" The entire cafe had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Maya's eyes were wide with fear, her bottom lip trembling. Jamal's internal monologue was screaming. "She's a child. It was an accident. Don't you see she's scared?" But his voice came out even, measured. "Mom, I apologize. My daughter just—" "I don't care," the woman interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. She pulled a crisp $50 bill from her wallet and threw it on her own table. "This should cover my coffee. Keep the change. Maybe you can use it to buy your daughter a sippy cup." And then, to Jamal's disbelief, he recognized her. It was Elizabeth Sterling, the CEO, the woman whose portrait hung in the lobby of the building where he spent his nights making things pristine for people just like her. He, the man who buffed the scuffs from the floors she walked on, was now the scuff. He was invisible to her at work, just a part of the building's machinery. Here, in the light of day, he was something worse, an annoyance, a blemish on her perfect afternoon. She turned and walked out of the cafe without a backward glance. The silence she left behind was heavy, thick with judgment. Jamal felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him, dissecting him, pitying him. He slowly sat back down, his body feeling heavy as lead. He looked at Maya, who was now crying silently, big tears rolling down her cheeks and onto the drawing of her mother. He pulled her into his arms, tucking her head under his chin. Hey, it's okay, sweet pea. It was an accident. That lady was just having a bad day." He was protecting her, but he was also protecting himself, trying to reframe the raw humiliation into a teachable moment. Maya sniffled, her small voice muffled against his chest. "She was mean, Daddy." Her eyes were sad even when she was angry, like the kind where you smile, but your eyes don't, out of the mouths of babes. Jamal held her tighter. He had spent years teaching her about kindness, about seeing the person behind the behavior. And here she was, in the wake of being hurt, showing more empathy than the powerful woman who had just belittled her father. He felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost eclipsed the sting of the encounter. This, right here, was his real work. This was his legacy. Not the gleaming flaws of Sterling Financial, but the beautiful, compassionate heart beating against his own. "You're right, baby girl," he whispered. "You are so right." He stroked her back until her sobs subsided. He left the woman's $50 bill on the table, a small, silent act of defiance. He didn't want her money. He didn't want anything from her world except to be left alone in his. He picked up Maya's drawing, now slightly smudged with tears, and folded it carefully, placing it in his pocket. They walked home, the bright promise of the day feeling a little less certain. That evening, the air in their small apartment was thick with anticipation. Maya was a whirlwind of nervous energy, practicing her lines one last time while Jamal carefully pinned her handmade owl wings to her costume. He checked his watch. 6:15 p.m. The play started at 7 p.m. Mrs. Patterson, their lovely silver-haired neighbor, would be there at 6:30 to walk Maya the 2 blocks to the school auditorium. Jamal had to work a short shift, a mandatory cleaning after a big board meeting, but he had timed it perfectly. He would be done by 6:45, giving him just enough time to race to the school and slide into his reserved seat before the curtain rose. "Third row, center seat," Maya reminded him, her voice serious. "Third row, center seat," he confirmed with a smile. "I'll be there. I promise." The doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, her face wreathed in a kind smile. Well, don't you look like the wisest little owl I have ever seen, she exclaimed, and Maya beamed. Jamal gave his daughter one last hug. You're going to be amazing, sweet pea. Break a leg. That means good luck, Mrs. Patterson, Maya explained sagely. I know, dear, I know, the older woman chuckled. Now, let's get you to the stage. As they left, Jamal felt a familiar pang of love and anxiety. He was doing it. He was juggling it all. The job, the grief, the parenting. It was a precarious balancing act, but he was making it work. He grabbed his work keys and headed out, the echo of his promise to Maya propelling him forward. The shift would be quick. He'd be back in time. Everything was under control. The Sterling Financial Tower was a ghost town on a Saturday night. The cavernous marble lobby, usually teeming with power brokers and ambitious analysts, was silent and empty. Jamal's footsteps echoed as he made his way to the maintenance office. The air was cool and still, the building breathing its own quiet, mechanical sighs. He liked it this way. At night, the building belonged to him and the other members of the cleaning crew. They were the keepers of the quiet, the restorers of order. They moved through the halls like phantoms, erasing the chaos of the day. He started his work on the 40th floor, the executive level. The board meeting had been in the main conference room. He could see the remnants of a tense day, half-empty water bottles, discarded notepads filled with aggressive scribbles, a lingering scent of expensive cologne and stress. He worked efficiently, his movements practiced and economical. Wiping down the massive oak table, collecting the trash, vacuuming the plush carpet. His mind was on the school auditorium, the low hum of the crowd, the smell of popcorn, the sight of Maya's proud face under the stage lights. He checked his watch. 6:40 p.m. He was making good time. He was just finishing up when his radio crackled to life. It was Hector, the security guard at the front desk. Jamal, you up on 40? Hector's voice was tinny and laced with uncertainty. Yeah, Hector, what's up? Got a weird situation here. We have an unresponsive individual in the CEO's office. It's Miss Sterling. She's not responding. The door is locked from the inside. Jamal's blood ran cold. Elizabeth Sterling, the woman from the cafe. Here. Now. Did you call for help? Paramedics? Her assistant called me an hour ago. Said Miss Sterling was staying late to deal with something and not to disturb her. Said she'd had a rough day. I did my rounds, saw the light was still on, and knocked. Nothing. I don't want to call 911 unless I have to. You know how she is about appearances. Jamal knew. Everything at Sterling Financial was about appearances. A 911 call for the CEO on a Saturday night would be a PR nightmare. But a person could be dying behind that door. I have the master key for the executive suite, Jamal said, his mind already racing. I'm on my way. He grabbed his key ring and hurried down the hall. The polished silence of the floor now felt ominous. He reached her office, a corner suite with glass walls overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. Hector was waiting for him, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. I can hear something, Hector whispered, like crying. Jamal pressed his ear to the heavy wood door. He could hear it too. A low, guttural sound of pure misery. It wasn't the sound of a medical emergency. It was the sound of a soul breaking. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, the scene from the cafe flashing in his mind. Her cruelty, her dismissiveness. He owed this woman nothing. But that wasn't who he was. That wasn't the man Angela had married. It wasn't the father Maya looked up to. He slid the master key into the lock and turned. The scene inside stopped him in his tracks. Elizabeth Sterling was on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass from a framed photo. A half-empty bottle of expensive scotch lay on its side, a dark stain spreading across a stack of papers. She was weeping, not the quiet, dignified tears of a powerful woman, but the messy, racking sobs of someone who had lost everything. Her makeup was smeared, her perfect hair was in disarray, and she was talking to herself, her words slurred and nonsensical. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes unfocused and wild with pain. "Get out," she slurred, trying to push herself up and failing. "Everyone, just get out of my life." Jamal checked his watch. 6:52 p.m. Maya's play was starting in 8 minutes. The school was a 15-minute drive away. He had already missed his window. A cold dread washed over him. He had promised. "Mom, are you all right?" he asked, keeping his voice low and calm. "My name is Jamal. I work here. The security guard was worried about you." She just shook her head, another wave of sobs overtaking her. It was clear she was deeply intoxicated and in the throes of some profound emotional crisis. He looked at Hector, who just shrugged, his expression a mixture of pity and fear. "We can't just leave her here," Jamal said, more to himself than to Hector. "Her assistant isn't answering. Her emergency contact is her ex-husband, and I don't think that's a good idea." Hector said, reading from a file on his tablet. "I can't leave the front desk for that long, and policy says we can't transport an employee." The responsibility, heavy and unwanted, settled squarely on Jamal's shoulders. He looked at this broken woman, a shell of the icy executive from the cafe. He saw the raw pain in her eyes, the same pain he remembered feeling in the days after Angela's death. And in that moment, she wasn't Elizabeth Sterling, the CEO who had humiliated him. She was just a person, drowning. He checked his watch again. 7:05 p.m. The curtain was rising. Maya would be scanning the audience, looking for him in their seat. Her heart would be breaking, and his was breaking right along with it. He had a choice. He could call an ambulance. Consequences be damned. He could walk away and let security figure it out, get to the play, and maybe salvage the last half of his daughter's big night. Or he could do the right thing, the hard thing, the thing that would cost him. He looked at the glittering city outside the window, then back at the woman on the floor. He thought of Maya's words. Her eyes were sad even when she was angry. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said to Hector. "I'll handle it. I'll get her home." He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Mrs. Patterson, his thumbs feeling clumsy and slow. Something came up at work. "I'm so sorry. I'm going to be late. Please tell Maya I love her and I'm trying to get there." He had made his choice. He had chosen to help a stranger in crisis over keeping the most important promise in his life. And as he knelt down to help Elizabeth Sterling to her feet, he prayed it was a choice that wouldn't end up costing him everything. Getting Elizabeth out of the building was an ordeal. She was a dead weight, barely conscious, leaning heavily on him as they navigated the long, silent hallways to the service elevator. Her scent, a mix of expensive perfume and cheap despair, filled the small space. Jamal's mind was a frantic cacophony of worry. He pictured Maya on stage, her small face falling as she scanned the crowd, and found their seat empty. The image was a physical blow, winding him. He felt like a failure, a liar. The one thing he swore he'd never do was break a promise to her. Where are we going?" Elizabeth mumbled against his shoulder, her voice thick. "I'm taking you home, Ms. Sterling," Jamal said, his tone professional, distant. He needed to maintain a boundary, a wall of formality around this deeply compromised situation. Down in the deserted parking garage, he managed to get her address from the driver's license in her wallet. A penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, a world away from his own small corner of Brooklyn. He buckled her into the passenger seat of his decade-old sedan, the worn fabric a stark contrast to her silk blouse. She immediately slumped against the window and passed out. The drive through the city was surreal. The streets were alive with Saturday night energy, people laughing, heading to dinners and parties, living their lives. Inside his car, the silence was broken only by Elizabeth's soft, troubled breathing and the frantic thumping of his own heart. He drove with exaggerated care, his hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, obeying every traffic law to the letter. He was a black man with a drunk, unconscious white woman in his car. He knew what that looked like. He knew how quickly a misunderstanding could escalate into a nightmare. Every police car he saw sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through his veins. When he finally pulled up in front of her opulent doorman building, a new problem arose. The doorman, a stern-faced man in a crisp uniform, took one look at Jamal's car and the state of the woman inside and immediately became defensive. "Can I help you?" the doorman asked, his tone implying Jamal was a threat. "I'm here to drop off Miss Elizabeth Sterling. She's not feeling well," Jamal said, trying to project an air of authority he did not feel. "I can't let you up," the doorman said flatly. "We have strict security protocols. I'll have one of the staff come down and assist her." He was looking at Jamal, not as a helper, but as a problem to be managed. Jamal understood. He was an unknown variable, a risk, but leaving Elizabeth with a group of strangers, in her current state, felt wrong. She was vulnerable, incoherent. He felt a strange, unwilling sense of responsibility for her. He remembered the raw misery in her office. She needed a quiet place to land, not to be manhandled by building staff who would be gossiping about it by morning. He made another split-second decision, one that defied all logic. He couldn't take her up to her empty penthouse. He couldn't leave her here, and he couldn't abandon her on a street corner. There was only one other option. It was a terrible, dangerous idea, but it was the only one he had. "You know what? It's fine," Jamal said to the doorman, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "A friend of hers is going to meet me a few blocks away. We'll take care of her." He put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had just lied to a doorman to essentially abscond with an unconscious CEO. He was driving away from her home toward his. The risk factor had just multiplied by 1,000. He was crossing a line from which there might be no return. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard. 8:15 p.m. The play was likely half over. His phone buzzed with another text from Mrs. Patterson. Maya did her big speech. She was wonderful. She keeps looking for you. A wave of nausea and self-loathing washed over him. What was he doing? He was sacrificing his daughter's trust for a woman who had treated him like dirt just hours earlier. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "This is the right thing to do," he told himself, the words feeling hollow. "Kindness isn't conditional. Angela would have done this." He clung to the memory of his wife, her boundless compassion a shield against his own fear and doubt. The journey to his Brooklyn neighborhood was a descent from one reality into another. The gleaming towers of Manhattan gave way to the brick-faced walk-ups and tree-lined streets of his world. He parked his car in its usual spot, the same spot it had been in every night for years. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. The simple act of walking from his car to his front door now felt fraught with peril. Getting Elizabeth up the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment was a Herculean effort. He half carried, half dragged her, his muscles straining. She was mumbling again, something about a failed merger, about someone named Richard, about betrayal. The words were disjointed, fragments of the life that had shattered in her office. Inside his apartment, the quiet felt sacred. This was his sanctuary, his and Maya's, and he had just brought the chaos of the outside world crashing into it. Maya's toys were in a neat bin in the corner. Her latest drawing was taped to the refrigerator. The whole apartment smelled faintly of the lavender fabric softener he used, a scent of home and safety. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't put her in his own bed. The implication felt too dangerous. The only other option was Maya's room. It felt like a violation, bringing this stranger into his daughter's personal space. But the pull-out couch in the living room was currently broken. With a heavy heart, he carried Elizabeth into Maya's small, pink-walled bedroom. He laid her gently on the bed, on top of the unicorn-patterned comforter. Her expensive heels looked absurd next to a stuffed giraffe. Her clothes, particularly her blazer and blouse, were a mess from the spilled scotch and her time on the office floor. He couldn't leave her like that. His mind raced, calculating the optics of every possible action. He found one of Maya's oversized sleep shirts, a plain grey one that she had outgrown. It was the most neutral thing he could find. With clinical detachment, moving with the care of a paramedic, he removed her soiled blazer and blouse and slipped the clean t-shirt over her head. He left her skirt and undergarments untouched, pulling the comforter up to her chin. He took her shoes off and placed them neatly by the door. He folded her blouse and blazer and put them on the dresser, a problem for the morning. He backed out of the room, his heart pounding. He had just undressed his boss. The thought was terrifying. He knew how it could be twisted, how his care could be reframed as a violation. He needed to create evidence of his intentions. He found a notepad and a pen. His hand was shaking as he wrote, "Miss Sterling, you were unwell at the office. I tried to take you to your apartment, but the doorman would not allow me up. I did not feel it was safe to leave you there or with staff. I brought you here because it was the only other safe place. This is my daughter's room. I slept on the floor in the living room. Your clothes are on the dresser. There is water on the nightstand. My name is Jamal Hill. I work in maintenance at your company. My number is..." He wrote down his number. "I hope you are feeling better." He read it over and over. It sounded sterile, robotic, but it was the truth. He placed the note on the nightstand next to the glass of water. Then he went into the living room, grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet, and laid down on the floor just outside Maya's bedroom door. He didn't want to be in the living room. He wanted to be right there, a sentry, a clear and unambiguous guardian. He wanted her to see him on the floor if she woke up, a clear signal of the boundaries he had maintained. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. He felt a profound and aching loneliness. He had broken his promise to his daughter. He had put himself in a position of incredible risk. He had done what he thought was right, but it had brought him no peace, only a gnawing anxiety. He pulled out his phone and looked at the picture of him and Maya on his lock screen, both of them grinning, their faces squished together. He whispered an apology into the quiet of his apartment. "I'm so sorry, sweet pea." He eventually drifted into a restless, dreamless sleep on the hard floor, a world away from the man he had been just a few hours before. The first slivers of morning light crept through the blinds, painting stripes across the unfamiliar walls. Elizabeth's head throbbed with a dull, persistent hammer. A thick, fuzzy blanket of confusion enveloped her mind. Where was she? This wasn't her bedroom. Her bedroom was a study in minimalist grey and white, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. This room was small and pink. Unicorns danced on the comforter pulled up to her chin. A child's drawings were taped to the walls, vibrant and full of life. A wave of nausea, followed by a surge of pure cold terror, washed over her. She sat up, the room spinning. She looked down at herself. She was wearing a soft, worn grey t-shirt that was not hers. Her skirt was rumpled, but she was still wearing it. Her expensive silk blouse and blazer were nowhere in sight. Panic, sharp and electrifying, seized her. Her mind was a complete blank. The last thing she remembered was being in her office. The phone call, the betrayal. Richard, her business partner and ex-husband, had pushed her out of a deal they had built together, effectively stealing a massive part of their shared company. The pain had been blinding. She remembered scotch, a lot of scotch, and then nothing. She was in a stranger's house, a man's house, she assumed, in a child's bedroom, wearing clothes that were not hers. The implications crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. Every horror story, every cautionary tale she had ever heard screamed through her mind. Her hands trembled as she scanned the room. Her purse was on the floor by the bed. She fumbled for it, her fingers clumsy. Her phone was inside. Thank God. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unlock it. Her first instinct, her only instinct, was to call Claire. Claire was her best friend, her lawyer, her rock. Claire would know what to do. The phone rang twice before Claire picked up, her voice thick with sleep. "Elizabeth, it's 6 in the morning. Is everything okay?" Elizabeth's voice came out as a raw, terrified whisper. "Claire, I don't know where I am." The line went silent for a beat as Claire processed this. "What do you mean you don't know where you are?" "I woke up in someone's house. A man's house, I think. I'm in a little girl's bedroom." Elizabeth's voice cracked, hysteria bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'm wearing clothes that aren't mine. Claire, I don't remember anything from last night. I don't remember how I got here." "Okay, Elizabeth, stay calm." Claire's voice was suddenly sharp, all business. "Are you hurt? Do you feel like anything happened?" The unspoken question hung in the air between them, heavy and horrifying. "I don't know," Elizabeth sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. "My head hurts, but I don't know. Don't touch anything. Don't move. Where are your clothes?" Claire's questions were rapid fire, a lawyer building a case. Elizabeth's eyes darted around the room and landed on the dresser. Her blouse and blazer were there, neatly folded. That was, odd. A rapist probably wouldn't fold the clothes. The thought was jarring, a small point of logic in a sea of panic. Next to the clothes was a small frame photo of a smiling black man and a little girl with big, happy eyes. The man looked vaguely familiar. Jamal, asleep on the floor outside the door, was jolted awake by the sound of her muffled, crying voice. He sat up instantly, his body stiff from the hard floor. He knew this moment was coming. The moment of waking. The moment of confusion. The moment of fear. He stood up, his back against the wall, perfectly still. He heard his name being whispered from inside the room. Not his name, but the description of him. "There's a picture of a black man and his daughter," Elizabeth whispered into the phone. "He works for me, I think. Maintenance or janitorial staff." Jamal's stomach plummeted. He knew how this would play out. A black man, his drunk white boss, in his house, in his daughter's bed. It didn't matter what had actually happened. The story wrote itself, and it was a story that never ended well for him. His reputation, his job, his freedom, even his custody of Maya, it could all be incinerated by one phone call to the police based on her fear and Claire's assumptions. "Oh my God, Elizabeth," Claire's voice was sharp with alarm. "This is bad. This is really, really bad. A subordinate. He took you from the office. You need to call 911 right now. Tell them you've been abducted. Don't talk to him. Just get out of there and call the police." "But my clothes are folded," Elizabeth said, the detail sticking in her mind. "And there's a note." Her eyes had just landed on the piece of paper on the nightstand. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. She read Jamal's neat, careful handwriting. "Miss Sterling, you were unwell. I tried to take you to your apartment. Doorman would not allow me up. I brought you here. Only other safe place. This is my daughter's room. I slept on the floor in the living room." Jamal heard the rustle of the paper through the door. He held his breath. His entire future was contained in that little piece of paper and her willingness to believe it. "What does it say?" Claire demanded. Elizabeth read the note aloud, her voice wavering. The story it told was so different from the one her fear had constructed. "I slept on the floor in the living room." She slowly, quietly got off the bed and crept to the door. She turned the knob with infinite care and pulled it open just a crack. There, in the hallway, was an indentation in the carpet where a pillow and blanket had clearly been. He hadn't been in the living room. He had been right here, outside her door, like a guard, a protector. The image was so incongruous with her fear that it caused a fissure in her panic. Why would an attacker sleep on the floor outside the door? Why would he leave a polite, detailed note with his full name and phone number? "Elizabeth, did you hear me? Call the police," Claire's voice insisted from the phone. "Wait," Elizabeth whispered. She pushed the door open a little wider. The apartment was small, humble, but meticulously clean. From the hallway, she could see into the living room. On a small table was a framed photo of a beautiful woman with a kind smile, and next to it, a program for a school play. The Whispering Woods, starring Maya Hill as the wise old owl. The performance had been last night, Saturday. A memory, blurry and distant, surfaced. A man's voice full of anguish on the phone. "I'm going to be late. Please tell Maya I love her." He had been on the phone with someone about his daughter, about a play. He had missed his daughter's play. For her. The thought was so staggering it made her lean against the doorframe for support. The man in the photograph, the man whose apartment she was in, had made a sacrifice for her. For Elizabeth Sterling, a woman who, just that morning, had treated him and his child with callous cruelty in a coffee shop. The memory of the cafe incident came rushing back, flooding her with a hot, sickening wave of shame. She looked around the room again, her eyes now seeing things differently. She saw the unicorn comforter not as a strange detail, but as a sign of a beloved child. She saw the drawings on the wall as expressions of love. Her gaze fell on a particular drawing on the nightstand, one that hadn't been taped to the wall. It was of an angel with big, kind eyes, watching over a stage. Tucked into the corner of the paper was a little note, written in a child's scrawl. "For Daddy, for your wallet, so Mommy can watch me with you." "Elizabeth, what is going on? Talk to me." Claire's voice was a frantic buzz in her ear. Elizabeth lowered the phone. She looked at the drawing of the angel, at the note explaining that she was going to miss the play, at the indentation on the floor where he had slept. The narrative of fear and violation crumbled, replaced by a story of profound, almost unbelievable integrity. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing had happened. Nothing except an act of radical kindness from a man she didn't deserve it from. Meanwhile, Jamal was in his own small kitchen, making coffee, the scent a small comfort in the tense silence. He had heard the door open and had retreated, giving her space, letting her discover the truth on her own terms. He couldn't force her to believe him. She had to get there herself. His phone rang, and his heart leaped into his throat. It was Mrs. Patterson. "Jamal, honey, I just wanted to check on you. You never made it last night." Her voice was full of concern. "I know, Mrs. P. I'm so sorry, something unavoidable came up at work." "Well, Maya was a trooper. A little sad, of course, but she was so brave. She said, 'Daddy is doing something important. He keeps his promises, so this must be a super promise.' I have the video for you. She was a star." Tears pricked at Jamal's eyes. A super promise. His daughter had more faith in him than he had in himself right now. "Thank you, Mrs. P. That means the world. I'll come get it later." He hung up just as Elizabeth appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was holding her phone in one hand and the note he had written in the other. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but the terror was gone. In its place was something he couldn't quite read, a mixture of shame, confusion, and dawning respect. "Mr. Hill," she said, her voice quiet, uncertain. "Miss Sterling," he replied, his own voice steady, though his heart was racing. He stood perfectly still, letting her control the space, the conversation. He had done all he could do. The rest was up to her. The chasm between their two worlds had never felt wider, or more terrifying. Elizabeth stood in the doorway of his small kitchen, the neatly written note feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. The man before her, Jamal Hill, was the same man she had dismissed so cruelly in the cafe. The same man her friend was insisting, through the phone still pressed to her ear, was a predator. But the evidence of her own eyes, of this quiet, dignified apartment, told a different story. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders. He wasn't looking at her with malice or triumph. He was looking at her with a kind of weary patience, as if he were waiting for a verdict he had long ago accepted might go against him. On the phone, Claire was still talking, her voice a frantic buzz. "I've got a partner from the firm's criminal division on standby, Elizabeth. Just give me the address. We'll handle this quietly, but decisively. We need to get ahead of it." Elizabeth raised a hand, silencing Jamal before he could speak. She turned slightly away from him, a small gesture of privacy, of respect. She brought the phone back to her mouth. Her voice was different now, clearer, steadier. "Claire, I need you to listen to me," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need you to stop talking and just listen." There was a surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Nothing happened," Elizabeth stated, the words simple and absolute. "Do you hear me? Nothing happened. He helped me." She could almost feel Claire's disbelief through the phone. "Elizabeth, you don't know that. You were intoxicated. You're in a vulnerable state. You can't possibly—" "I know it," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "He left a note explaining everything. He tried to take me to my own apartment. The doorman wouldn't let him up. He brought me here because he didn't know what else to do. He didn't want to leave me on the street." She glanced back at Jamal, who stood unmoving by the coffee maker. His expression was unreadable, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not relief. Not yet. It was too soon for relief. "He has a daughter, Claire," she continued, her voice softening. "Her name is Maya. Last night was her school play. He missed it. He missed his daughter's play because he was on the phone with his building security about me, because he was driving me across the city, because he was making sure I was safe." The weight of that sacrifice settled on her, profound and humbling. "He slept on the floor," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "outside the door to the room I was in. He put me in his little girl's bed and slept on the floor, like a security guard." A long silence stretched from Claire's end. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a dawning understanding. "On the floor?" Claire finally asked. Her tone completely changed. "Yes, I saw the spot where the pillow was. He gave a drunk, belligerent stranger his child's bed and took the floor. He wrote down his full name and number and left it for me. These are not the actions of an attacker, Claire. These are the actions of a good man." The words felt strange and powerful in her mouth. She had spent her life surrounded by powerful men, by ambitious men, by ruthless men like her ex-husband. Goodness, in its pure, unadulterated form, was a concept she rarely encountered. "Okay," Claire said softly. "Okay, Elizabeth, I hear you." "I need to go," Elizabeth said. I have to fix this." She hung up the phone before Claire could reply. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Jamal hadn't moved a muscle. He had heard every word. He felt the massive weight that had been pressing on his chest lift, just slightly, just enough to breathe. It wasn't absolution, not yet, but it was a start. It was the sound of a narrative shifting, of a different story being chosen. Elizabeth finally turned to face him fully. The power dynamic between them had been irrevocably altered. She was no longer the imperious CEO, and he the invisible janitor. They were two people in a small kitchen, linked by a moment of crisis and a profound act of integrity. "Mr. Hill," she began, then stopped. The name felt too formal, too distant for the magnitude of what had transpired. "Jamal." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I don't have the words to—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely with the note. "Thank you is not enough. I'm so sorry is not enough." She looked around the apartment, at the evidence of his life, a life she had barged into. I read the program for your daughter's play. The mention of Maya was a sharp pang in Jamal's chest. Yeah, he said, his voice quiet. She was the wise old owl. And you missed it, because of me. The shame in her voice was palpable. It was a raw and genuine emotion, nothing like the cold anger he'd seen in the cafe. This was a different woman standing before him. I got a call from work, he said simply, not accusingly. It was a statement of fact. After what I did yesterday, in the cafe. She visibly winced at the memory. I was abominable. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was having a terrible day, but that is no excuse. I treated you and your beautiful daughter with such disrespect, and then you did this. Jamal finally moved. He poured a cup of coffee and pushed it across the small counter toward her, a simple gesture of peace. You were hurting, he said. It wasn't an excuse for her, but it was an acknowledgement of the truth he had seen in her office. It was what Angela would have said. Elizabeth looked at the cup of coffee as if it were a life raft. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. My business partner, who is also my ex-husband, essentially staged a corporate coup yesterday and pushed me out of the company I built. I found out right before I went to that cafe. I was unmoored. She said it not to justify her actions, but to explain the broken person he had found. I'm sorry to hear that, Jamal said, and he meant it. He knew the feeling of having the world ripped out from under you. A thought, born of a lifetime of solving problems with money, occurred to Elizabeth. It was her default setting. I need to compensate you for this, for the cleaning of my clothes, for the trouble, for missing your daughters. I don't know. I'll write you a check. Whatever you think is fair. $1,000. $5,000. Just name it. Jamal's posture stiffened instantly. The fragile bridge of understanding that had been building between them suddenly seemed to crumble. He looked at her, and the warmth in his eyes was replaced by a cool, profound disappointment. No, he said, his voice firm but not angry. No, Miss Sterling? You don't get it. Elizabeth was taken aback. I don't understand. I'm trying to make it right. You can't buy your way out of this, he said, his voice low and intense. You think this is about money. I didn't do this for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I did it because you were a person in pain, and I couldn't just walk away. I did it because I have to be able to look my daughter in the eye and teach her about character. And character isn't something you can buy or sell. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small kitchen. What you did to me in that cafe yesterday, that was about money. You looked at my clothes, you looked at my daughter's spilled hot chocolate, and you made a judgment. You decided I was worthless, and you threw money at the problem to make it go away. And that's what you're trying to do now. The truth of his words hit her with more force than any insult ever could. He was right. She was transactional. She saw problems and she wrote checks. She didn't know any other way to be. I don't want your money, Jamal continued, his voice softening slightly, becoming weary. I want something much more expensive. I want you to see me. Not the janitor, not the guy who spilled hot chocolate on your blazer. Me, Jamal Hill, a man, a father. That's it. That's all I've ever wanted. To just be seen. The raw vulnerability in his statement stripped away the last of her defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shame and a strange, aching gratitude. He was giving her a gift far greater than any check she could write. He was giving her a lesson in humanity, her own and his. Okay, she whispered, nodding slowly. I see you, Jamal. I see you. And in that moment she truly did. The invisible man had become the most solid, most real person she had met in a very long time. The world she had built, a world of power and wealth and isolation, suddenly felt flimsy and false compared to the quiet, unshakable dignity of the man standing in front of her. She had come here as a victim of her own circumstances, but she would leave as a student of his character. The real fixing wasn't about compensating him. It was about changing herself. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. We love seeing how far these stories travel. After Elizabeth left, taking a cab back to her own world, a profound quiet settled over the apartment. It was no longer the tense, anxious silence of the night before, but a calm, reflective quiet. Jamal felt as though he had walked through a fire and, to his own astonishment, had come out the other side unscorched. He had stood on the razor's edge and had not fallen. He spent the morning cleaning, a ritual that always soothed his mind. He scrubbed the coffee pot, tidied the living room, and changed the sheets on Maya's bed, erasing the last physical traces of Elizabeth's presence. But he knew her presence would linger in other, more significant ways. The encounter had changed something in the atmosphere of his life, a subtle shift in pressure he was still trying to understand. Later that morning, he walked over to Mrs. Patterson's apartment to pick up Maya, who had spent the night after the play. The moment Maya saw him, she launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, you're here," she squealed, hugging him with all her might. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of her. "Hey, my little owl. I'm here." He expected questions, accusations, disappointment, but Maya just pulled back and looked at him, her expression serious. "Mrs. Patterson said you had a super promise to keep." He knelt down to be at her eye level. "I did, sweet pea. I'm so sorry I missed your play. I wanted to be there more than anything in the world." Maya's brow furrowed. "Was the person sad, Daddy? The one you had to help?" Jamal was taken aback. He hadn't mentioned a person. "What makes you say that?" "Because you only miss things for me when someone is really sad," she said, her logic simple and flawless. "Like when you had to help Mrs. Patterson's sister when she fell." He felt that familiar crack in his chest, the one Maya's innocent wisdom always created. He had been so worried about her being disappointed in him, but she hadn't judged his absence. She had trusted his character. The faith she had in him was a mirror, reflecting the man he always strived to be. "Yeah, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The person was very sad." "It's okay then," she said, patting his cheek. "You can watch the video. Mrs. Patterson said she got a really good close-up of my big speech." Her forgiveness was total and unconditional, a balm on his bruised soul. That afternoon, they sat together on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them, and watched the video of the play on Mrs. Patterson's tablet. Jamal watched his daughter on the small screen, her face serious under the stage lights, her voice clear and confident as she delivered her lines as the wise old owl. She was magnificent. He felt a surge of pride so powerful it ached, but it was colored with the deep, unshakable regret of not having been there, of not seeing it with his own eyes. As the video ended and the small audience on screen applauded, Maya turned to him. "Did you like it?" "I loved it, sweet pea. You were the best wise old owl the world has ever seen," he said, pulling her into a hug. "And I promise you, from now on, I will be in the third row, center seat, for everything, no matter what." "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered into his shoulder. "Mommy saw it. She told me you were doing the right thing." Jamal held her tight, tears stinging his eyes. He didn't know how she did it, how she seemed to channel her mother's grace and wisdom, but he was endlessly grateful for it. She was his moral compass, his true north. The next day was Monday. As Jamal walked through the gleaming lobby of the Sterling Financial Tower, he felt different. He still wore his maintenance uniform, still carried his keys and his cleaning cart, but the cloak of invisibility he usually wore felt a little thinner. He had always tried to move through this world unseen, to avoid friction, to present the smallest possible target. but his encounter with Elizabeth had changed him. He had been seen, fully and completely, in all his vulnerability and all his integrity. And the world hadn't ended. He expected things to be different. He expected whispers, strange looks from other staff members. He half expected to be called into HR and fired for some trumped-up infraction. But the day was unnervingly normal. No one seemed to know anything. Elizabeth, it appeared, had kept her word. She had protected him. It was late in the afternoon when he got a message to report to the 41st floor. Not to a conference room to clean, but to Elizabeth Sterling's office. His heart began to pound. This was it. The other shoe was about to drop. He knocked on her door, the same door he had unlocked 2 nights before. "Come in," she called. He entered. She was sitting behind her massive desk, but she stood up the moment he came in. She was dressed in her usual power suit, but her demeanor was completely changed. The icy mask was gone. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear and direct. "Jamal, thank you for coming," she said. She gestured to one of the plush chairs in front of her desk. "Please, sit." He remained standing. He was still an employee in the CEO's office. The muscle memory of their respective roles was strong. Elizabeth seemed to understand. She walked around the desk, choosing to lean against the front of it, bringing herself closer to his level, both literally and figuratively. The desk was no longer a barrier between them. "First," she said, "I want you to know that I have spoken with Hector from security. I clarified the events of Saturday night to ensure there is no misunderstanding of your actions in any official capacity. I commended your quick thinking and professionalism in a difficult situation. Your record here is not just clean, it's exemplary." A small measure of the tension in Jamal's shoulders eased. That was his job, his livelihood. It was safe. "Second," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "I meant what I said yesterday. I see you, and I am profoundly sorry for how I have failed to do so in the past. Not just in the cafe, but every day here. You and your team. You are the people who make this place run. You create the environment where we can do our work. And I have taken that for granted. That will change." He just nodded, unsure of what to say. "Which brings me to my third point," she said, taking a deep breath. "I know I can't give you back the experience of seeing your daughter's performance. That moment is gone, and I am responsible for its loss. I cannot fix that with money, as you so rightly pointed out." She paused, and for the first time, she looked uncertain, almost nervous. "So I had an idea. It's not a check. It's an attempt at a different kind of currency. Presence, as you said." She handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. His name was written on the front in elegant script. He opened it. Inside was a professionally printed flyer. "The Sterling Foundation for the Arts is proud to present a special encore performance of Northwood Elementary's The Whispering Woods." Below the title was a date for the following Saturday. The venue wasn't the school auditorium. It was the Brooklyn Community Playhouse, a beautiful historic local theater that the Sterling Foundation had recently helped renovate. Jamal stared at the flyer, speechless. "I spoke with your daughter's principal this morning," Elizabeth explained, her voice soft. "I told her that my foundation would like to sponsor a community arts night. We will provide the venue, professional lighting and sound, and a grant for the school's drama department. All they have to do is put on their wonderful show one more time. For the community." The principal was enthusiastic. Jamal looked from the flyer to her face. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a payoff. This was respect. This was using her power not to erase a problem, but to create an opportunity. She had heard him. She had truly heard him. "Your daughter and her castmates will get to perform on a real stage, for a bigger audience," Elizabeth said, "and my only condition to the school was that one seat be reserved, 3rd row, center." Jamal finally looked up and met her eyes. He saw the genuine hope there, the desire for this gesture to be received in the spirit it was intended. And, she added quietly, I was hoping, if it's not an intrusion, that I might be able to attend as well. I would buy a ticket, of course. I'd sit in the back. I would just like to see the wise old owl for myself. For the first time since that terrible night, Jamal felt a genuine smile spread across his face. It started in his chest, a warmth that pushed aside the last of the fear and resentment, and rose to his lips. I think, he said, his voice full of a lightness he hadn't felt in years, I think Maya would like that very much. The following Saturday was electric. The Brooklyn Community Playhouse was buzzing with energy. The families and friends of the Northwood Elementary cast filled the velvet seats, their faces beaming with pride. For these kids, performing in a real theater was the thrill of a lifetime. The air smelled of old wood, stage dust, and excitement. Backstage, Jamal helped Maya adjust her owl wings one last time. She was practically bouncing off the walls, her eyes shining brighter than any stage light. "Daddy, can you believe it? A real dressing room, with lights around the mirror," she exclaimed, spinning in a circle. He smiled, his heart feeling full to bursting. "You earned it, sweet pea, you and all your friends. Now go out there and be the wisest owl this side of the Brooklyn Bridge." He gave her a quick hug and then made his way to his seat. Third row, center. It was perfect. He could see the whole stage, could see the hopeful, nervous faces of the children peeking out from behind the heavy velvet curtain. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Mrs. Patterson, settling into the seat next to him. "Now, this is more like it," she said with a satisfied smile. "A proper stage for a proper star." Jamal scanned the crowd. He wasn't looking for anyone in particular, but his eyes drifted toward the back of the theater. In the dim light of the last row he saw her, Elizabeth Sterling. She was alone, dressed not in a power suit, but in simple dark slacks and a sweater. She looked smaller without her corporate armor, just a person in a crowd. She caught his eye and gave a small, almost shy nod. Jamal nodded back. It was a silent acknowledgement, a closing of a circle. The house lights dimmed. A hush fell over the audience. The curtain rose. The play was magical. The children, energized by the real stage and the packed house, gave the performances of their young lives. When it was time for Maya's big scene, Jamal leaned forward, his hands clasped together. Maya walked to the center of the stage, her small frame exuding a surprising authority. She looked out over the audience and her eyes found his. She gave him the tiniest of smiles before her face settled back into the stern, wise expression of the owl. She took a breath and began her speech. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the theater. Jamal didn't hear the words. He had them memorized. Instead, he watched her face. He watched the way the light caught the confidence in her eyes, the pride in the set of her small shoulders. He was witnessing her shine. This was the moment he had almost lost. This was the gift Elizabeth had given back to him, not with money, but with understanding. It was the gift of presence. When the play ended, the applause was thunderous. The children took their bows, their faces flushed with joy and triumph. Maya, standing in the center, beamed, her eyes once again finding her father in the crowd. He was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone, tears of pride streaming down his face. After the show, as families milled about in the lobby, congratulating the young actors, Jamal saw Elizabeth slip out a side door, avoiding the crowd. She wasn't looking for thanks or acknowledgement. She had simply come to bear witness. Later that night, back in their own quiet apartment, Jamal tucked a very happy, very tired little owl into bed. "Did you see me, Daddy?" she mumbled, her eyes already drifting shut. "Were you in our seat?" "I saw you, sweet pea," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "I was right there, and you were everything." He went into the living room and stood by the window, looking out at the familiar city lights. For years, He had lived his life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to never give anyone a reason to question his character. He had built his world around a core of fear of being misunderstood, of being misjudged, of having everything taken away because of the color of his skin and the assumptions of the world. But that night in the office, he had made a different choice, a dangerous choice. He had chosen to be visible, to step into a situation fraught with risk, armed only with his own integrity, and somehow, against all odds, it had led him here, to a place of new understanding, of mutual respect, of a quiet, profound hope. He pulled his wallet from his pocket and took out the small, tear-smudged drawing Maya had made in the cafe. The angel with the kind eyes, watching over everything. He thought of Angela, his guiding star, and the lessons she had taught him about love and compassion. He was honoring her memory not by staying frozen in his grief and fear, but by living fully, by taking risks for the sake of kindness, by being the man she had always known he was. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe it never would be. The razor's edge he walked would always be there. But maybe, just maybe, there were more people like Elizabeth Sterling in the world. People who were capable of seeing past their own prejudices. People who could be reached. People who could learn. Maybe there were still people who could see him for who he really was. And as he stood there, the father of the wise old owl, a man who had been rendered visible by his own quiet courage, he realized that maybe that was enough. From invisible to unforgettable. Jamal proved that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. If you believe in stories about everyday heroes, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that integrity still matters.